Hello, this is Stephen Janis. I'm a reporter for the Real News Network in Baltimore. Backwards, bloated, inept, reactive, and insular. These are words critics have used to describe Baltimore city government, an institution that has been much maligned as the city's population has declined while crime, taxes, and poverty have steadily increased. Particularly after the death of Freddie Gray in police custody. Promise of police reform made before he died seemed at best misleading, and the decision to let school out early the day of Gray's funeral and close down public transportation seemed to precipitate a crisis that tore the city apart. But now, amid the ashes, comes a possibility of change, an election unlike any in recent history. Besides Mayor Stephanie Rawlings-Blake's decision not to run, 6 members of the council, nearly half, chose not to seek re-election as well, and several races are too close to call. Meanwhile, that same council passed 2 sweeping potential amendments to the city charter that could change the way money is appropriated and spent. So to help me sort out the implications of all this, and if real change is possible, is a panel of the best reporters in town. Luke Brawler is an award-winning investigative reporter for the Baltimore Sun who covers City Hall. Jay Miller is a veritable institution in Baltimore and the winner of the DuPont Award for her coverage of the uprising. And Taya Graham is a reporter for the Real News Network whose coverage of the firing of the first black police chief in Pocomoke City has received national attention. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, so just to say, I mean, let's just set the table here before we talk about some of the stuff we talked about before. Has there been an election like this in recent history where there's so much at play in terms of power in the city?
Absolutely not. Really, not in, I mean, I've been in this town for, God forbid, almost 40 years, and no, I mean, absolutely not. I mean, there have been big changes, you know, first elected black mayor back in the mid-'80s. There's all kinds of transformational things that have gone on, but not kind of this collision of all, the confluence of all these things at the same time, with a new mayor, as many as 9 new council members.
You think it's possible that we have 9?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the, you know, some of these races are very competitive. So you have 6 that are leaving, and so 6 open seats.
6 open seats, right? You know,
and 3 that are really competitive. So yeah, you really have the potential for a lot of change. So no, this is definitely historic in terms of all that is in play.
And Luke, along with, you know, we talked about before, we don't have to go into details of all, but along with the change of the council might be some changes to structure of city government. Could you just talk a little bit about the Board of Estimates? They want to change the Board of Estimates, which is the spending board that controls all of city spending. And so what are they trying to do with that? Right.
The Board of Estimates is really where the mayor gets her power from. That's where the strong mayor system of government, the power lies. The proposal that has passed the city council is for the mayor's 2 appointees to be stripped from the board. So it would be equal power on the board between the city council president, the comptroller, and the mayor. And many see this as a way where you would have basically 3 co-mayors who are deciding all city spending above $25,000. There's a tremendous amount of power on that board, and the proposal is to equalize it.
So let's just be honest, and I asked both of you this. We talked about what the implications are, because, you know, I hadn't really thought about it, but this could mean that basically the city council president is like a co-mayor, and that means Jack Young?
Well, yeah, I think what's interesting is that, first of all, the council bill was passed after the filing deadline.
That's right.
So the city council president in Baltimore is a citywide elected job, but it's usually a very sleepy race. It's become a sleepy race. Not always, but it's become a sleepy race because it has no power. Right. I mean, the city council president is the city council president. Right. And the council president sits on the Board of Estimates as currently configured, but the votes, or the rest 3 votes go with the mayor, so, right, correct. So he really didn't have any power. So as a result of that, there's been very little competition. There is an opponent to Jack Young, who's been in office for a long time, but, you know, barring a real upset, Jack Young's going to be the next city council president. So, yes, so to your point, I put this like, while no one was looking, Jack Young has worked his way into power. I mean, to become, you know, co-mayor.
Well, Luke, you covered council for years. I mean, what kind of mayor would Jack, I mean, I don't know how to ask this question, but, you know, and I never thought of this analysis until I talked to you guys. I mean, where do you think Jack fits in with this power structure?
Well, I think Jack has had, the council president Young has had the ambition for many years to be mayor.
I think so,
Many people have talked about that. When he decided not to run this year, I think that did surprise some people. This would have been a chance for him. There's no incumbent mayor. He has
more money than anybody.
He has the most money of anyone in the race, and
campaign money.
But maybe he thought, well, okay, this is my chance. You know, I can pass this through. I can have the equal power to the mayor. Many people like this legislation, think it's good government legislation, and this would give him the chance to have a wide say and influence over city government without having to beat all these very, very tough competitors in the mayor's race.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Tay, there's one other piece of legislation there that's going to change basically the appropriation. The council will then have power to appropriate money, right? We're talking
Right.
about.
Well, at this point, the city council can only cut money from the budget. They can't add money to it. So the mayor really holds all of the fiscal control. Now, if this amendment passes, the city council will have a lot more power, and they will actually be able to have more power over the appropriations process. Now, this could lead to an imbalance or a change in dynamics. It would essentially undercut the mayor's power, and it could lead to city council members appropriating district-specific pet project.
Wow. So and so, all taken together, Jane, are we going to have like chaos at City Hall? I mean and I'll tell you why I asked this question because
Well, you know, this point really needs to be made, though. That
because I've always thought the unitary mayor was sort of a way to impede progress, but
I think there is. I think that there's definitely room for a new vehicle, so that there is. So some of that power is taken away, and it's spread out over, you know, other positions and other, you know, members of the spending board. The state, for example, has 3 members of the spending board,
right.
and there are 3 people that could have independent votes. They're not dependent on one another. So ideally, yes, that would be good to have a 3-person spending board. The mayor's 1, 2 other elected officials are the other 2, and you have kind of a well-oiled democracy. You know, the problem is that with this bill this year, the bill passes after the filing deadline. So there's not really robust competition for these other 2 jobs, the city council president and the city comptroller. There's not. So in this year of change, we're going to get a brand new mayor, but the power is going to rest with the city council president and the comptroller, who've been in office since the mid-1990s, and that's not changed.
Yeah, and let me ask you about Joan Pratt as a comptroller. Has she been what you would call active comptroller, or is she sort of, I mean, what do you see from her suddenly coming to this position of power based on her past record?
Well, I'll say for years, Joan Pratt, I don't know if the right word is docile, but she did not challenge the mayor on many things for many years. We did see a flare-up over the phone system, famously. So we know that Joan Pratt does have it in her to go to challenge the mayor on things. It just doesn't happen that often.
Right.
Now, the real criticism of her has been the auditing, and whether there's been enough auditing and robust auditing of all the city agencies. Auditing falls under the comptroller. It's actually one of her very few duties is auditing. And she defends herself, says we do audits, we do X, Y, and Z audits.
Performance audits more than fiscal, I think.
Right, but many people think it's inadequate and more needs to be done. And that's the main critique that her challenger is leveling against her. Of course, this is a challenger who hasn't raised any money. So it's not, you know, how much of a challenge is it really when you haven't been able to raise the kind of money that you need for a citywide campaign.
And she's refused to debate.
That's right.
Right. So really, there hasn't been a race at all at this point, and I don't think he has any chance of winning.
To my knowledge, I have seen 0 evidence that Joan Pratt is actually campaigning. I believe she thinks she's just going to win on her name recognition, and that people around the city know her.
So now that we have this total new dynamic. We also have council races. You know, as we said, 6 people are not running.
There are a lot of dynamic candidates in these council races.
Now, Tay, you've been paying attention to the 13th district. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, well, Shannon Sneed is running against Warren Branch for the 13th district, and she had done this before and during the last election cycle, and she only lost for about roughly 40 votes.
40 votes, yeah.
So. In the case of Warren Branch, and the Baltimore Sun actually did a really interesting article on this, Warren Branch has one of the worst attendance records when it comes to council votes. So Shannon Sneed is putting forth this change that I think his constituents are looking for. And the the 13th district has one of, I think it's an example of civic neglect. It's got 4,700 vacant homes. They've had rec centers close, pools close. Right. So I think Warren Branch's constituents may be open to a change at this point.
And Talia, am I correct that Warren Branch is also the chair of the Public Safety Committee, which should be one of the most active, aggressive, nailing the feet to the fire of as many
it's our
police commanders. Absolutely, and with everything about police reform and overtime, all that kind of stuff, and yet it's nothing. coming out of there, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to open this up to both Luke. And what's going on with the first district? I mean, all the money.
I know that. I know that.
You
I know
live
that.
there,
Right.
didn't you?
Well, I lived there, but I also moderated the candidates night.
Right. But where's
they have
all this
really
money
sharp
coming from?
candidates.
I mean, this seems more like almost a race for mayor in terms of just the money.
Yeah.
And I think that had the council bill passed before the filing deadline, I think there are districts, the first district, which is Southeast Baltimore, one of them, some of those candidates would have run for citywide office.
And Luke, you were saying?
Yeah, in the first district, you have 3 candidates who have raised well in excess of $100,000.
Which is unprecedented for a council.
Tremendous amount for a city primary race in one district. That's the kind of money you could run for mayor or city council president with.
Absolutely.
And the 3 candidates who have done that each sort of have their own alliances. One is Zeke Cohen, who is a Teach for America guy, and he's able to tap into some of this education, nonprofit type money. Another is Mark Edelson, who has a lot of the business and development money coming into him. And a third is Scott Goldman, who's a Harvard guy, a military guy, and he's got money coming in from all over the country.
Really?
So, yeah, the fact that
his father is very active politically too. Yeah, and so I know this because I was at that candidates night, so I'm familiar
this
with all
is kind
them.
of I mean, and also this is a district that Hogan won, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you have
significantly won. I mean, you know, not by a narrow
7%
margin.
or
Yeah,
so,
correct.
yeah.
Correct.
So you have, I think,
and there are
citywide-
Republican candidates in that race too that are, viable candidates. Yes,
credible
correct.
candidates.
Sure.
Right.
Credible
So a
candidates.
Republican could win that.
There's a chance.
down
There's
the
a
road,
chance.
yeah, correct.
I mean,
yeah.
Now, they
in the
don't
general-
have the money raised right now, but I talked with Joe Cluster from the state GOP, and he said that whoever wins out of their primary, the state is going to really focus resources on that candidate. So I expect that to be a competitive race in November.
The other district I think is interesting is the 9th district, which has been the Welch dynasty for 100 years. And you have a
That
Towson
actually
professor.
predates me.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, well,
I think
she was elected to council. Agnes Welch was elected in like 1980, right? Or 19.
No, I think it was earlier than that.
In the 70s?
I would say 78.
Wow, the disco
I
era.
landed here about 79. I think she was on the council when I
And
got
as we know, the 9th district again, as Taya pointed out, the 13th district is in terrible shape. And you have John Bullock, who is a Towson University professor. Does he have a shot in the 9th district to unseat the legacy seat that we have there? Does he have a shot?
I think so. He was third to Welch 5 years ago. And, he's gotten a lot of endorsements. He's gotten a lot of money this time around. He's got the unions on his side. So I think that he does have a good chance to win. Now, Welch has been somewhat of an inactive councilman, but one thing he does almost every week is he brings up people from the community, youth baseball teams, senior awards and things like that. And he gives them citations. Yeah. So I expect there's a lot of refrigerators in the 9th district with awards from Councilman Welch.
Magnets.
And
refrigerator magnets.
That's an old school tactic, but don't be surprised if that
That's
doesn't
Baltimore,
work.
right? I mean, Baltimore's
Yeah.
retail. Is there any other district, Jane, that you see where anything could happen that's interesting? I mean,
Bill Henry's district is really competitive. That's the
Brian Hammond, 4th district. Yeah, 4th.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Hammond, there's another one who has raised, raised, what, $150,000, $175,000?
Yes. And then there's...
and he's got the O'Malley people behind him, right? I think.
To my knowledge, yes, right.
Yes.
In big numbers.
In big numbers, yeah.
To my knowledge, there's only 5 candidates citywide running for city council that have raised over $100,000, and 3 of them are in the first district.
And
the other is
one-
Hammock, and then Eric Costello, the incumbent.
Oh, right, yeah, of course.
In the 11th district, who has a tough race, too.
That's a tough race. I was down in that part of town today, which is on the south side of the harbor. And it's like every other house is a different lawn sign.
Yeah.
That's a really competitive
There's a very
race.
impressive
Yes.
challenger named Dia Thomas in that district, who I think
Right.
is might give him a run for his money.
Now, Taya, has any of this sort of chaos translated any sort of interest in voters that you can see appreciable? I think Luke Broadwater wrote a story about this, but I'm going to give you this question
to
give credit where credit's due.
Absolutely. Well, early voting is definitely up, and there's been a high turnout across Maryland. I think there's 3 times since the last presidential primary in 2016.
In terms of early voting.
In terms of early voting,
What
and I
about
think
the
in
city?
Baltimore itself, 7 times during the last mayoral election. So, I mean, I think that even Baltimore, 30,000 voters have come out.
That's
now,
really amazing.
Now this change, it might be because there's more early voting centers, but I think since the uprising and the national attention, I think people are more civically engaged. I think they really want to participate. And I think this trend is showing that the level of civic engagement and the personal agency of your average Baltimore voter has really risen.
Well, okay, so we got to.
I'm really eager to see what happens on Tuesday with numbers.
Yes.
Because well, first of all, Passover starts Friday, today.
Right.
And that drove some of the early voting in the northwest part of the city,
Right.
correct?
Correct.
I'm really going to be interested to see
if this is sustainable?
If there were
If we're not just
74,000
capturing all the-
votes
right.
cast in 2011
Right.
in the mayoral primary on the Democratic side, that when there
It's gonna
was
be more though, right?
and there's no other race going on in
Yeah,
2011.
right, of
Now it's a
course.
presidential race as well, and it's competitive on the presidential side. So
I have to believe it
I
will
think
be
so,
more.
too.
Yeah,
but
I think
so, too.
I do think what we are seeing is mainly is at least 75% of this. I think is people who would have voted on election day
Probably.
simply voting early. But I do think if we don't have an increase in this election, we have a real problem
have a
in this country.
Well, I got to wrap it up. So just really quickly, are we going to see any change from this election in City Hall? Really quick, short answer because we got to wrap up.
I think the jury's out.
The jury's out. Luke, what do you think?
Real change?
Real change.
Well, we're going to have personnel change for sure.
Yes, we're going to have different names.
I'm
That's
always
correct.
skeptical, though, about real change.
Okay.
Always skeptical.
Taya, what do you think?
Well, it seems like we might have Jack Young for mayor.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining me. I appreciate it. We'll come back and discuss this probably after the election and sort this all out. My name is Stephen Janis, and I'm a reporter for the Real News Network in Baltimore. Thank you for joining us.